So picture this. You've got um, maybe 5 different browser tabs open.
Oh, yeah, familiar scene.
Right. And you are trying to plan that well-deserved summer vacation for 2026. You've got your dates meticulously lined up.
You finally agreed on a destination.
Exactly. You hit search and you physically recoil from your screen.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the sticker shock is so intense you instinctively assume there's a glitch in the aggregator.
Yeah, you're refreshing the page, clearing your cache.
But the number stays exactly the same. That domestic flight really is just going to cost you a small fortune.
It is a really harsh reality check for anyone looking at the travel landscape right now.
It really is.
When we dive into the early 2026 data, domestic fares are up roughly 15% across the board compared to recent baselines.
15%, wow.
Yeah, and the most difficult aspect for consumers to digest is that broad sweeping price declines just aren't coming. The systemic relief travelers usually expect after a spike is highly unlikely to materialize this year.
Which is exactly why we are dedicating this deep dive to tearing the entire system apart. We have a massive stack of recent travel reports today.
We've got pricing data from major aggregators like Kayak and Expedia.
Right, plus internal airline industry analyses. And our goal today isn't just to validate that frustration you're feeling.
Though it is very valid.
It is. But we want to figure out the underlying mechanics of why flights are so punishingly expensive right now. And, more importantly, how you can strategically bypass those forces.
So what does this all mean?
It means we need to decode the aviation market. That way you can make smart, data-backed decisions instead of just throwing your hands up and paying whatever the algorithm demands.
Exactly. And to bypass the system, you really have to understand the specific macroeconomic drivers keeping those prices artificially high.
Okay, let's get into it. What are we looking at?
Well, there are 3 massive forces acting as a bottleneck on the aviation industry right now. The first, inevitably, is fuel.
Right, it always comes back to fuel.
But it's not just the raw price of crude oil. Ongoing geopolitical instability has obviously caused major supply disruptions.
Sure.
But it has also severely impacted global refining capacity. So the spread between crude oil and refined jet fuel, which is the actual product planes burn, has widened significantly.
Okay. So the airlines are absorbing that volatile refining premium and just, passing it directly on to you, the consumer?
Exactly. Every cent.
See, the fuel argument always feels like the easiest lever for airlines to pull when justifying price hikes. But fuel prices eventually stabilize, right?
Usually, yeah.
So the deeper issue seems to be the physical capacity of the airlines themselves. I mean, we are years removed from the pandemic now.
Right.
Yet the actual inventory of available seats, like the physical capacity to move human beings from point A to point B, is still hovering roughly 6% below pre-pandemic levels.
And that capacity constraint is entirely structural at this point. It's a compounding crisis of supply chain failures and labor shortages.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, on the equipment side, you have massive, well-documented delivery delays from major manufacturers like Boeing and Airbus.
Right, they can't get the planes.
Exactly. Airlines simply cannot get their hands on new airframes fast enough to expand their route networks or even replace aging planes.
And then there's the human element too, right?
Yeah, combine that with a sustained pilot shortage that was driven by early retirements a few years ago, plus a training pipeline that takes years to produce qualified commercial captains.
So the industry literally cannot fly the number of routes it wants to.
They physically can't.
So we have a scenario where the airlines have a restricted supply of seats, but the demand for leisure travel hasn't diminished at all. Consumers are still aggressively prioritizing experiences in travel.
Which brings us to the third factor. And honestly, this is the one that really exposes the current corporate mindset.
Okay, what is it?
Looking at an analysis from Amex GBT, major airline CEOs are openly communicating their strategy to investors. And the phrase they keep using is retaining pricing strength.
Retaining pricing strength, okay.
Yeah. They are explicitly signaling that even if jet fuel prices plummet and supply chains miraculously heal tomorrow, they have absolutely no intention of lowering ticket prices.
Wait, really? Okay, let's unpack this. Because it's like a restaurant raising burger prices because of a beef shortage.
Right.
But then when the shortage ends, they just keep the prices high because people are still paying it.
That's exactly what's happening.
Right.
The Amex GBT analysis projects some stability, maybe very minor price drops in economy travel later in the year.
But not because they want to help us out.
No, the underlying motivation is pure yield management. Airlines are holding prices high because their internal data shows they have finally hit the absolute ceiling of what the consumer market will tolerate.
Wow. So if they push the median domestic fare any higher, they trigger demand destruction.
Exactly. They aren't trying to offer a fair market rate. They are extracting the absolute maximum margin before the consumer entirely breaks.
But see, I look at this through the lens of basic market dynamics. Usually, if legacy carriers are artificially inflating prices and pulling in massive margins, a budget airline steps in, right?
That's how it's supposed to work, yeah.
They strip out the perks, undercut the legacy carriers by half, and force everyone to compete on price. It's the standard capitalist correction. But right now, we aren't seeing that correction at all.
We really aren't. And we aren't seeing it because the ultra-low-cost carrier model, the traditional price equalizer in the aviation market, is currently breaking down under these specific economic conditions.
Oh, interesting. So budget airlines are struggling.
Very much so. Carriers like Spirit Airlines are facing severe financial distress. We've actually seen a wave of bankruptcies and route map contractions in that sector.
But why is their model failing right now if demand is so high? I mean, shouldn't a budget carrier be absolutely thriving when legacy airlines are overcharging?
You'd think so, but it comes down to how their operating model functions. A budget airline survives on incredibly tight margins. And that requires two things: cheap debt to lease planes and maximal aircraft utilization. They need to keep a plane in the air 14 to 16 hours a day just to turn a profit.
Oh, wow, 14 hours.
Yeah. But right now, interest rates make their debt incredibly expensive.
Right, that makes sense.
Furthermore, persistent air traffic control shortages and overcrowded airports mean planes are delayed on the tarmac. Budget airlines simply cannot hit their utilization targets.
So when they shrink their route maps or collapse entirely, millions of cheap seats just vanish from the market.
Oof. God.
It essentially removes the pricing floor. If the legacy airlines know you don't have a $99 alternative, they face zero pressure to compete.
Not at all.
They have a captive audience.
Mhm.
And because they have algorithmic monopolies domestically, the traditional rules of supply and demand are broken. The system is rigged to weaponize your own booking habits against you.
Which is exactly why the traditional conventional wisdom of travel booking is currently destroying consumer wallets.
Right. Because historically, the prevailing advice was to book a flight 6, 7, or even 8 months in advance to lock in the best rate, right?
Yeah, that was the golden rule. But in 2026, operating under algorithmic yield management, doing that is an absolute mathematical trap.
Let's look at the data from Expedia on this, because it challenges everything a Type A planner believes in.
Yeah.
The booking timeline is entirely counterintuitive now.
It really is.
If you book 6 to 8 months out, you pay a massive premium. If you wait until under 3 weeks, say 14 days or less, you also pay an enormous premium.
What's fascinating here is the underlying mechanics of airline yield management. It explains this perfectly.
Okay, tell us how the algorithm thinks.
Well, airlines classify that early anxious planner booking 6 months out as an inelastic buyer.
An inelastic buyer, meaning they aren't flexible.
Exactly. They know you are willing to pay a premium for the psychological comfort of having the flight secured. So the algorithm assigns a high initial price.
Essentially using those early bookers to establish a baseline of guaranteed revenue for the flight.
Precisely. They use the planners to subsidize the flight's fixed costs.
Unbelievable.
And once that baseline is secure, they just let the remaining inventory sit.
Okay, so then what happens as the date gets closer?
Then the algorithm tracks the remaining unsold seats. If the flight isn't hitting its load factor targets, the system automatically begins dropping the price to stimulate volume.
So it creates a sweet spot.
Right. It creates a very specific Goldilocks window for domestic flights. The data pinpoints this as exactly 15 to 30 days before departure.
Wow. Just 15 to 30 days.
Yeah, the prices dip to capture the flexible leisure traveler right before dramatically spiking again at the 14-day mark.
And that 2-week spike is obviously designed to capture the desperate corporate traveler or, the emergency last-minute flyer who will pay literally anything to get on that plane.
Exactly.
So the sweet spot is that 15 to 30-day window. But asking a family to wait until 3 weeks before a major summer vacation to book their flights, that requires absolute nerves of steel.
It really does. It requires abandoning the comfort of preparation.
Yeah.
Now, it is worth noting that major holiday timing operates on a slightly modified algorithmic curve.
Because the demand is universally high and predictable for holidays.
Right. The points guide data strongly indicates that for Thanksgiving travel, the algorithm actually begins its volume stimulation phase in mid-October.
Okay, good to know. But the baseline rule remains. You absolutely should not be booking your November travel in May.
Definitely not.
Okay, so understanding the algorithmic curve and holding your nerve for the domestic Goldilocks window can save you a percentage.
A decent chunk. Yeah.
But we've already established that the entire domestic market is artificially inflated by about 15% anyway. So if the domestic algorithm is rigged, the most logical response is to simply change the game board.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we shift the strategy from timing the market to leveraging geography entirely.
Yes. Here's where it gets really interesting. When we look at the Kayak 2026 travel report, alongside the insights from Dollar Flight Club, the contrast between domestic and international pricing is staggering.
It's night and day.
While domestic routes are punishing, international routes are actually showing massive price dips. We are talking about the mechanics of geo-arbitrage.
Yeah, and for those unfamiliar with the specific application of geo-arbitrage in travel, it's a fascinating concept.
Break it down for us.
It basically involves leveraging the varying operating costs, currency strengths, and most importantly, localized market competition across different geographical zones to lower your overall expenditure.
Essentially, you take your strong domestic currency and spend it in a market where fierce competition drives down the cost of the actual plane ticket.
Right.
And then the local economy makes your dollar stretch further upon arrival. The destination swaps available right now prove this out beautifully.
They really do. The kayak data on Eastern Europe is a prime example of this.
Oh, the numbers there are wild.
Flights to Sarajevo are currently down 36% year over year. Split in Croatia is seeing a 33% drop in airfare.
That's massive.
And the traditional historical hubs like Prague and Budapest are following the same downward trajectory.
And it extends far beyond Eastern Europe, too. Cancun airfares are down 35%. Marrakech, Morocco is down 31%.
Even Rome is seeing drops.
Yeah, even Rome, which is arguably one of the most consistently in-demand tourist hubs on the planet, is showing a 16% decline in flight costs.
It's incredible.
We are living in a reality where flying 10 hours across the Atlantic Ocean to drink an espresso in Italy might mathematically be cheaper than taking a 3-hour domestic flight to visit family in the Midwest.
It sounds absurd, but it's true. And the economic driver making that possible is open skies agreements and fierce international competition.
Right, because we discussed how domestic airlines operate as regional monopolies without the threat of budget carriers.
Exactly. The international market is the exact opposite. Over the Atlantic, you have legacy U.S. carriers fighting for market share against heavily subsidized European national carriers.
Plus the Middle Eastern giants.
Yes, and a thriving sector of international low-cost carriers that haven't collapsed like our domestic ones.
So because there are 50 different airlines fighting over the same airspace, no single algorithm can dictate the price.
Right. They are forced to aggressively push targeted, localized discounts just to keep their planes full.
Makes sense. If a European carrier wants to establish a new route to Marrakech, they have to actively incentivize you to go there instead of taking an established route to Paris.
So if your primary objective is simply to take a brilliant summer vacation and you aren't geo-locked to a specific domestic city, leaning into geo-arbitrage is your best bet.
Just executing these international destination swaps.
Exactly. It's the single most effective method to completely bypass the domestic pricing monopoly.
It totally changes the value proposition of a summer trip.
It does.
But we also have to recognize the practical realities of our listeners' lives. You can't always geo-arbitrage your way out of obligations.
Sadly, no.
Sometimes you have a wedding in Ohio or a family reunion in Texas or a work conference in Chicago. You have to fly domestically. So how do we navigate that without getting entirely fleeced?
When you are forced into the domestic market, you have to utilize a highly specific tactical approach to the booking process. It requires understanding the off-peaks of the leisure economy.
Let's look at the concept of discount hubs. If you were forced to fly domestically, the data highlights 3 massive anomalies in the pricing structure.
Right, Las Vegas, Orlando, and Fort Lauderdale.
Exactly. If you can route your travel through these specific airports or use them as a jumping-off point, the fares are often 25% cheaper than the national average.
And the underlying economics of these specific cities explain why. Vegas and Orlando are high-volume, purpose-built leisure economies. The local governments, the tourism boards, and the casinos or theme parks fundamentally depend on keeping human volume incredibly high.
They need bodies in the door.
Exactly. To ensure planes stay full, these municipalities often heavily subsidize airport operations. They drastically lower the landing fees and gate costs for the airlines.
So they basically treat the airport as a loss leader. get the bodies in the door cheaply, because they know the tourists will spend exponentially more on hotel rooms, blackjack tables, and theme park tickets once they arrive.
That's it exactly. And the airlines pass those subsidized savings on to the ticket price. Because a full plane flying into Vegas guarantees reciprocal demand flying out.
That makes total sense.
And then you combine that geographical routing with an understanding of seasonal demand. Historical data consistently points to August as the lowest average ticket cost of the entire summer season.
Because June and July capture the peak wave of the family vacation rush. By August, the school year is looming, that massive demographic of family travelers exits the market, and the airlines are forced to drop prices to stimulate whatever lingering late summer demand is left.
Exactly. So you pair an August departure with a routing through a subsidized leisure hub like Orlando.
It mitigates the damage. But there is one final, highly effective mechanism highlighted by platforms like Travel Pirates.
Oh, this is a great one.
And it requires understanding airline ticketing tiers. We are looking at a strong advisory against purchasing inflexible basic economy tickets.
The temptation to click basic economy is overwhelmingly strong, I know, because it is always the lowest number on the screen.
Right. But in a market where prices are governed by volatile algorithms, buying an inflexible ticket is actually the riskiest financial decision you can make.
You are basically surrendering your ability to respond to the market.
Exactly. Purchasing a standard, fully flexible economy ticket instead of basic economy is essentially buying an insurance policy against the airline's own pricing algorithm.
This is such a smart tactic.
Let's break down the exact mechanism of how this works. Let's say you simply cannot stomach the anxiety of waiting for that 15 to 30-day Goldilocks window.
Which is fair.
You are a planner. You need your August flight to Vegas booked 4 months in advance.
Which means you are deliberately choosing to be classified as an inelastic buyer.
Right.
And you will pay the early booking premium.
You pay the premium, but you purchase the standard flexible ticket. You lock in your seat and secure your peace of mind.
But you aren't done.
No. The crucial next step is to immediately set a price tracker for your exact flight on Google Flights or Kayak.
Right.
When the calendar inevitably hits that 30-day window before your departure, the airline's algorithm shifts into volume stimulation mode.
It drops the price of the remaining empty seats to fill the plane.
Yes, and your tracker alerts you to the sudden price drop.
Because you hold a flexible ticket, the airline's own policies allow you to change or rebook your flight without a penalty fee.
It's brilliant. You log into the airline's app, you select Change Flight, and you reselect the exact same flight and the exact same seat you already hold.
The system recognizes the new, lower algorithmic price, and the airline legally owes you the price difference in the form of a travel credit.
You pocket the difference. You get the psychological comfort of the early planner, but you capture the financial savings of the last-minute gambler holding out for the algorithmic dip.
You use their own refund policies to extract the artificial premium they charged you 4 months prior. It is a brilliant utilization of system mechanics.
It really is.
Reading a headline that says, domestic flights are up 15%, leaves a consumer feeling powerless.
Completely.
But when you understand how to layer these strategies, utilizing international geo-arbitrage when flexible, or relying on August off-peaks, subsidized discount hubs, and flexible ticketing arbitrage when flying domestically, you entirely invert the power dynamic.
You stop playing their game and force them to play yours. So if you are gearing up to book your 2026 travel, keep these mechanisms in mind. Look at the international map and see how far your strong currency can take you in highly competitive markets like Eastern Europe or North Africa.
Or if you stay domestic, map out the leisure hubs.
Hold your nerve for the 30-day algorithmic drop and leverage flexible tickets to capture the eventual price correction.
You know, looking at the broader data, though, it does raise a profound question about the future of the aviation industry.
Oh, what are you thinking?
Well, we are analyzing a landscape where budget airlines are failing under high interest rates and supply chain bottlenecks, leaving legacy carriers with unchecked pricing power.
Right.
They are openly committing to retaining high prices regardless of operational costs, forcing consumers to rely on complex algorithmic loopholes just to afford a standard summer vacation.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It begs the question, are we quietly witnessing the end of the golden age of democratized travel?
Wow, that is a staggering implication.
Think about it. If the underlying structural issues, the lack of planes, the lack of pilots, the monopolization of domestic routes continue to compound, Domestic flight could revert to being a luxury strictly reserved for the wealthy.
Like it was back in the mid-20th century.
Exactly. And if the sky becomes an exclusive club, it fundamentally alters how a society functions.
Yeah.
How does it change the way we connect with our own country? Or our ability to maintain relationships with the distant family members? Or our capacity to explore diverse cultures within our own borders if average citizens simply cannot afford the price of admission?
It changes the entire social fabric of how we move and interact. It's a heavy, deeply important thought to consider as we watch these market forces play out over the next few years.
It really is.
Well, the current X-ray of the travel industry reveals a system that is undeniably fractured and heavily tilted against the consumer.
But as we've discussed, by understanding the mechanics of how that system operates, you don't have to be a casualty of it.
Exactly. You have the data, you understand the algorithms, and you have the tactical toolkit to navigate the complexities of 2026 pricing. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Now, go weaponize this data, beat the algorithms, and plan a brilliant summer adventure. We'll see you next time.